That's right, we've got the car there, we've got the motorcade is round the corner as well. It's a short journey, but obviously that one needs to be done with the full security that we are going to see surrounding the Prime Minister. Worth remembering on a day like this how that affects elections as well. People often complain that the Prime Minister, the other party leaders don't interact properly with the public. David Cameron will now discover that he has more security from today than he's had at any other time in his life. And it means that they will have to pop in unannounced in places. Sometimes people condemn it as a kind of false photo opportunity, but that is actually what the security guys often ask them to do. Don't tell people where you're going, because then people can know about it. Just stop and decide and go. And we'll see more and more of that during this campaign.
An interesting thing to reflect on, Nick, which is that Gordon Brown could have done all this a few years ago.
Exactly, and had he done so, he, I believe, and many of his cabinet colleagues believe he would have had his own mandate, which he's been denied. Remember, when he comes out and calls this election, he's never done it before. He did not get into that building as a result of the people voting, but as a decision of the Labour Party itself. But he turned down that opportunity, being urged on him by many people in the autumn of '07, just after he'd become Prime Minister. He got everyone, marched them up the hill, and he marched them down again. At the time, there were denials, anything happened. We now know from all the accounts behind the scenes, people were hired, salaries were paid, poster sites were booked, ready for an election, which would have massively discomforted the Tory party had he done it, but he lost his nerve at that stage. Now he's really gone to the wire. He could have not done it today, he could have done it in June, but he would have brought the ire on him of many in the Labour Party, because they would have then had to fight local elections anyway on May the 6th, and a general election a few weeks later.
Just as we enjoy the views there of central London, Nick, and some of the geography of today's events, let's just also reflect on today's opinion polls, which, to say the least, paint a rather mixed message.
They do indeed. You're getting now one newspaper with YouGov the pollster, and it's the Sun newspaper, saying the Tories are back up where they used to be, with a 10-point commanding lead, with the Tories above 40% for the first time in many months. You're getting, meanwhile, ICM in The Guardian saying, no, that lead is in fact squeezed, it's down to just 4%. The difference here between a commanding Tory majority and a hung Parliament, maybe even Labour, as the largest party in Parliament. The thing I think we have to remember again and again with these polls is no one poll is right, every poll has a margin of error, and the lead that people talk about doubles the margin of error. In other words, when you see the Tory figure, what the pollster's telling you is it's plus or minus 3%, up to, if you're interested in statistics, a 95% probability. Make that the lead, it's double that. Forget all the detail, what you have to know is don't believe every poll, look for the trends. The trends are clear. The Tories were way ahead, it's squeezed, and then there's been some sign of it opening up again a little bit.
Well, someone who's been keeping a very close eye on the polls, I've no doubt, is the Queen. Her Majesty is on her way to Buckingham Palace right now, and she's in fact travelling, as we understand it today, by helicopter. That's a short hop from Windsor, so she's coming in for the audience with Gordon Brown, and she'll be leaving straight after it, a fairly brief meeting, and that, Nick, again, just a matter of formality, but it does really set the seal on a very troubled 5-year Parliament.
It does indeed. It's been an extraordinarily difficult period. You look back at Tony Blair when he was on this street 5 years and 1 day ago, and he talks optimistically then about securing economic stability and securing public investment. What would he have thought if, A, we'd been able to say, well, hold on, you're not going to even be there anymore. We pretty much knew that, but Tony Blair felt forced not to say it in public, annoying some. Gordon Brown may well be in the same position, telling us he's going to do a full term if he's re-elected. Few people believe that's the case. And had Tony Blair then known that we would be living through the longest, the deepest recession, according to some accounts, since the war, and with talk on all sides of cuts in public investment now, greater than made by Margaret Thatcher after the terrible recession of the early 1980s, it would have all felt very, very different indeed.
Nick, we'll be back with you in a short while, but as I say, the Queen, who was just arriving at Buckingham Palace, ready for that audience, and the Prime Minister will be leaving 10 Downing Street here at around 10 o'clock, so in just under a quarter of an hour's time, Prime Minister will be on his way. And Nick Witchell at Buckingham Palace, what can you tell us?
Huw, the Queen, we think, is arriving here within the next few minutes. She's come up from Windsor by helicopter. Now, I can't actually hear it at the moment. I'm now in the quadrangle within Buckingham Palace, and I can't see the flagpole from here. So a few moments ago, the Union flag was still flying. The Royal Standard, of course, will be broken out as soon as the Queen's helicopter lands here. But she will then make her way to one of the audience rooms. She's here with her private secretary. The Duke of Edinburgh has remained at Windsor, as I understand it. And she will then await the arrival of Gordon Brown sometime after 10 o'clock, we think. All the indications are, as I was saying earlier, that it will be a very brief audience. It won't take place in the Queen's private apartments, where his normal Wednesday evening prime ministerial audience takes place. That, of course, a weekly occurrence. But this morning, very much a brief meeting, a brief audience at which she will accede to the request for a dissolution of Parliament, and Gordon Brown then will return to Downing Street, as we've been reporting this morning, where he is expected to make that statement and announce that the election will take place on the 6th of May. But clearly, you know, Buckingham Palace has known for some days that this was going to happen today. They've been making the arrangements to get the Queen up from Windsor, where she's been spending Easter, and to which she will return later today. So there is the Queen's helicopter coming in from Windsor, just making its descent now into the grounds of Buckingham Palace. She left Windsor, I suppose it's what, about can't be much more than 15-20 minutes flying time from Windsor, skirting around London Airport, of course, making a safe passage through the crowded skies around Heathrow, and now just making its final approach into Buckingham Palace. And she will then make her way into first into her private apartments, and then into one of the audience rooms on the ground floor of Buckingham Palace, where she will see the Prime Minister, we think, shortly after 10 o'clock. And I can hear the helicopter just coming in now. There it is, coming in very carefully. You can see the grounds. In fact, that's probably Hyde Park that you can see in the background. Still the trees not in bud yet, but they're just making its way very slowly down. And the choice of helicopter this morning, unusual. She doesn't usually come between Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle by helicopter, but clearly this is an important occasion. Time is of the essence. She wanted to be here good and early, in time for the arrival of the Prime Minister at shortly after 10 o'clock, we think. And she will then be returning to Windsor later, because she has engagements there this afternoon. But that, by now, familiar form of transport for the Queen in the royal helicopter. Yes, now rather deafening, coming in very much. Just a few feet there, landing in the back garden of the palace. Let's just watch as this helicopter just moves in towards the building and touches down, of course, out of our sight. Yes, well, maybe they've done that deliberately, so deny us a sight of the Queen getting out of the helicopter. But there, she's now at Buckingham Palace, and doubtless they will be now flying the Royal Standard over this building, but it will take a few moments for the Queen just to disembark from that helicopter and make her way into the palace. Ah, there we are. We can see the royal helicopter there, and they will wait until the engine just shuts down and the rotor blades stop before anybody. There we are, and the flag, as I was mentioning, the Union flag comes down, and any second now we will see the Royal Standard being hoisted and being flown above Buckingham Palace to indicate that the Queen is in residence, very much temporarily here. She'll be here for little more than a couple of hours, I think, before she goes back to Windsor. This the 10th time that she has granted a dissolution at the request of her Prime Ministers. Gordon Brown, the 11th of the Prime Ministers of her reign. The first, of course, Winston Churchill, and going through the many decades since then. She has once been involved in a little bit of a constitutional controversy. That was the Royal Standard being broken out when Harold Macmillan decided to retire from the office of Prime Minister, and there was moves to involve the Queen in the choice of his replacement. But she's never been involved in any real difficulty in the event of a minority government. Now, that, of course, is a possibility this time, and it is conceivable that she will have to take advice from officials and from others if there is a minority government as to whom she should invite to form a government after the election on May the 6th. Now, this is all, of course, very hypothetical at this stage, but it is something, as we were discussing earlier, Huw, that the Queen and her officials have been ensuring that they are very much up to date with the latest thinking on what the area of latitude, the area of the room for manoeuvre for the Queen is in a circumstance such as that. They will be hoping very much that this doesn't arise, that there is a clear decision by the electorate, but they are prepared for a situation in which there is a minority government, in which the Queen has to decide who to invite to form a government. Now, she is above politics, she's outside of politics, but in that circumstance she would have to take advice from people, and not necessarily from Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, because he, as I was saying earlier, would be the one person who would not, in that situation, be neutral, would not be disinterested. But that very much a matter to come, because we have 4 or more weeks now of campaigning, but in the immediate prospect, within the next hour, we expect, now that the Queen is here at Buckingham Palace, we will expect to see Gordon Brown making his way from Downing Street here to Buckingham Palace, going in to through the door just behind me there to an audience room to ask the Queen for the dissolution of this Parliament.
Nick, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there at Buckingham Palace. As we saw, the Queen safely arrived. She's landed, coming from Windsor, ready for that audience with the Prime Minister. In Downing Street here, the Cabinet's still meeting, but once we see some of the Cabinet members emerging from number 10, we'll know that that meeting clearly is over, and then we can expect the Prime Minister's departure, and some of the cars and the cavalcade already in Downing Street, ready for that departure. So, while we wait for that, and while we wait for the Prime Minister and his colleagues to emerge, let's join Jon Sopel once again on the green.
Huw, thank you very much indeed. And it's not just the MPs who live in the Palace of Westminster, it's the political journalists, the lobby journalists who live there as well. And I'm joined by Jason Beattie, the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror. And how much of a role do you think the press is going to play in this election? Less of a role this time, what with the internet, what with the debates, what with everything else?
Well, you're right, the debates are going to be crucial, but it'll be the papers which will look at the debates, they'll analyse them, and they'll give a verdict the next morning, and that will be crucial. The public will make their mind up, that they will be steered mightily by what the press say, and we will come to a decision. Now, the debate's going to be fascinating. They've got a spin room at each of these. We learnt this from the Chancellor's debate. You go into these rooms, you've got the big guns of both parties, Lord Mandelson, William Hague, Chris Huhne, who just had on, they'll be going round as we write our copy, trying to persuade us to say, that was a good line by their player. The other side messed up a bit. You notice this, and we'll be trying to, shape opinions as we do this.
Which is what has happened in American politics for years, and it is a novelty in British politics. I mean, did anyone change what they were writing in that press room, in the spin room, as you call it, as a result of having been, strong-armed by Hague or Mandelson or whoever?
John, we like to think we're independent-minded, and we like to say, we're going to come to our own decisions, but obviously they're going to try and influence us. And, some of my colleagues will be slightly persuaded, I suspect. One side or the other, the independent newspapers, they're going to have a slightly harder job than a paper like the Mirror. We know we're backing Labour, we know where we stand.
No, that's an interesting point that you've made. And the Mirror has always been a Labour paper. It looks like News International, has the Sun and the News of the World and the Times and the Sunday Times are coming back towards the Conservative Party after their sort of flirtation or relationship with New Labour. Do you think there'll be other surprises?
I think actually most of the papers now have actually decided where they line up behind. There's not many. The interesting question about the papers is how many of their readers actually turn out to vote. At the last election, The Sun, only 52% of their readers actually voted. The Mirror readers were actually slightly higher, and most of them did vote Labour, I have to say.
Oh, right, and there was a correlation between the people who buy, because one of the things that's always surprised me when I've looked at these statistics is that you get newspapers which are kind of avowedly, pro-Conservative, and then you find that an enormous number of their readers are Labour voters and have no idea of the political affiliation.
Yeah, I'd say we're slightly surprised. We have 10% of our readers do vote Tory. We're not quite sure why.
Right, and so aside from that, what are going to be the game changers in this campaign?
Well, look, the campaign, to boil it down to its hope on the Tory side versus experience on the Labour side. You've got the Labour Party. Gordon Brown's going to come back from the palace. He's going to stand on the steps of Downing Street. He's going to have his cabinet behind him. He's going to say, we are the party of experience. Cameron is going to say, we're the party of change. Now, does change trump experience? That's a big question of the election.
Which is a question that has been posed before, and I suppose the Tories tried that in '97 when they were trying to resist the sort of the Blairite tide.
Yeah, it didn't work in '97. There was an overwhelming sway of public opinion wanting something different. It did work better in 1992. Remember, the Tories then had an election poster which was a big L, a learner driver plate. Don't let Labour in charge. It worked in '92. John Major got in by 21 seats. Is it enough for Gordon Brown this time? I don't know. We'll have to see.
Right, and so, and in the characterisation of that argument, I mean, interesting that you said that Gordon Brown is lining up with all his cabinet. If Gordon Brown thought he was the big selling point, wouldn't he just be out there by himself?
It's a difficult one. What they want to do is contrast with the Conservative lineup because they think the Conservative team has a very weak tail, to use a critical analogy. So they've got William Hague, they've got Ken Clarke, they've got David Cameron. Osborne was a big question mark over. Is he the person you want running your economy? So he looks weak, and as you go further down the batting order, it looks very weak indeed. But then you've got Labour, you can say, look, we've got these big guns of Mandelson, Jack Straw, Alistair Darling, they've been in cabinet for a long time, they know how it works, you can trust us. That's what they want to get across.
Yes, you used the sporting metaphor of the cricketing tail. Yesterday we had Gordon Brown and Wayne Rooney's foot. I mean, do you think people buy that sort of communication? The economy is like Wayne Rooney's foot.
It's when in an interview with the Mirror today, the Prime Minister's back on the sporting metaphors as well. He's almost throwing football chants at David Cameron. Can you trust this lot? Does it work? I think it does. It does resonate. People need to have language they understand in politics, and I think it's important. They want to get away from the horrible new Labour jargon which dominated the political scene for so long.
OK, I'm just going to carry on with the sporting metaphor. Do you think the Tories, they got 1-0 up in the first 15 minutes of play and thought, right, we'll crowd our penalty area and defend the lead and not try to score too many goals, and that's been a highly risky strategy as you look as the polls closing in as we reach, I suppose the final whistle would be the obvious metaphor.
I think the Tories had a problem. They started out with David Cameron going, let the sunshine in, we're new touchy-feely Tories. Then the polls started to close, and they went back to a bit of the old-style Tory agenda. And it's interesting, in some of the kind of marginal seats that, the Tories are still doing a lot of the old messages on immigration, Europe. There is a kind of disconnect with what David Cameron says in London and what they're actually doing in some of the regions. It's quite interesting, that.
OK, Jason, thank you very much for being with us. Let us take you back to Downing Street, where I'm sure that cabinet meeting is soon winding up. Huw.
John, thank you very much, and welcome back to Downing Street, where it is almost 10 o'clock, and I think in a short while we'll see the Prime Minister emerge to make that formal announcement later this morning. But first, of course, he'll emerge and make the short journey to Buckingham Palace. You're watching BBC News Live in Downing Street as Mr Brown is about to leave for the Palace this morning to ask the Queen for a dissolution of Parliament. He'll then return to Downing Street here formally to announce that the election will be held on the 6th of May. Cabinet's been meeting, and within the past hour, members of Gordon Brown's cabinet arrived at Downing Street. But I think we're now in a position to see the Prime Minister emerge. Prime Minister leaving Downing Street, looking very businesslike. No words for the waiting media at the moment, because of course he's saving that big statement for later on when he returns. So he's on his way, travelling north on Whitehall, and he'll be making his way over to Buckingham Palace. Past the entrance there to Horse Guards Parade and up towards Trafalgar Square. All of this journey, of course, planned in great detail, planned meticulously, down to the minute, from the Queen's arrival that we saw a short while ago at Buckingham Palace, allowing Her Majesty just, well, 10 minutes or so really to prepare for the audience which will take place in 5 or 10 minutes' time. So the Prime Minister's car, flanked by the Outriders, that's on its way along the Mall on this lovely sunny day, the 6th of April, precisely a month before the 6th of May, when that election is expected to take place. The Prime Minister's task this morning is to ask formally for a dissolution of Parliament, and that really means permission for the Houses of Parliament, both of them, the Lords and the Commons, to tie up their business, and for the process known as prorogation to take place, which is the ending of one Parliament before the next Queen's speech takes place. We expect, of course, in around June, when the next government, whichever government that is, presents its new programme of legislation to Parliament. And the Queen is there, of course, to open Parliament formally in that state opening, which happens after the election. Nicholas Witchell at Buckingham Palace.
Yes, there at the Victoria Memorial, the Prime Minister's car with the special escort group of the Metropolitan Police just turning in now through the gates of Buckingham Palace there, where the photographers are waiting, and across the forecourt, and now it will come into my side here within the quadrangle. Here it comes, the Prime Minister now coming through the gates into the quadrangle of Buckingham Palace. It will sweep round and draw up at the King's Steps, as they're known, and instead of going into one of the audience rooms within the Queen's private apartments, he will just go into an audience room on the ground floor. That, again, I think suggests that this will be a pretty brief meeting with the Queen. There is very little business for them to do. It's simply, in terms of the mechanics of this, a question of the Prime Minister asking the Queen for a dissolution of Parliament, and she will grant that. So there, Gordon Brown just emerging, being greeted at the door by Christopher Geitz, the Queen's private secretary, and making his way into Buckingham Palace, into this audience room, and the Queen will grant the dissolution of Parliament. In terms of the formalities, then tomorrow there will be a meeting of the Privy Council. There will be a royal proclamation which has to be agreed and granted, and then the writs will be issued for each of the constituencies within the United Kingdom. Those are the formal, as it were, legal mechanics of proroguing Parliament. It will be prorogued next Monday, and of course in the days between now and then, the parties at Westminster will decide on what legislation is finally going to be passed through this wash-up period. But here, the business of the moment inside Buckingham Palace, or there outside, you can see a few people gathering, just mostly tourists, I'm sure, wondering what's going on today. Well, the answer to that is that the Prime Minister is seeing the monarch and is asking for that dissolution of Parliament. We are into the general election of 2010. Within the next few minutes, we would expect the Prime Minister to emerge from the King's entrance there. His car has parked. You can probably just see a few yards back. No doubt it'll be 5 or 10 minutes, though. I'm sure they'll have a cup of coffee and just a brief discussion, but the Prime Minister will be keen to get back to Downing Street to make that statement in Downing Street, and he will, I'm sure, be keen to get out and begin campaigning along with the other party leaders, the other politicians, as this general election campaign begins.
Nick, once again, thank you very much. Nicholas Witchell there, and we'll be back with Nick when that audience ends. Not quite sure when that'll be, but it won't be too long, because we're expecting the Prime Minister, as I said earlier, to be back here in Downing Street to make that announcement. Well, let's have a rough guess at about maybe 11 o'clock. We'll see when he turns up, and it's just a reflection on some of the content of that meeting today, where of course they will look ahead in a month's time. The Queen certainly with an eye to what might happen on May the 6th and 7th if she has some kind of role to play in terms of who to call to form a government. That could all be very interesting, and we've not been in this position really at the start of an election campaign since 1992, though it wasn't needed then because John Major won his majority of 21. The last time the Queen was in this position really, when she was having to call someone in, was back in 1974 in February, when Edward Heath tried to form a government and failed, and then she called Harold Wilson. But the expert in all of that is with me here, Nick Robinson. Nick, just a thought now on the fact the Prime Minister left, very businesslike, and left straight away. He's gone to that audience. What is he going to be thinking on his way back before he makes this statement? What's riding on that?
Well, I think he knows that this is a moment to make a personal appeal to the British public. People will say, look, we sort of knew the date, we've heard some of the themes, isn't it all familiar? Well, no, he stands there on the steps of Downing Street for the first time in his career, saying to the British public, please keep me as your Prime Minister. He got the job, we have to keep reminding ourselves, because of internal elections in the Labour Party. In the end, there wasn't even a vote because he got so much support. And it's very different. Gordon Brown, a man who knows that the polls show that he's not personally that popular, that there are people who've got grave hesitations about him as a man, nevertheless knows that there's also been some respect built up for him by the way he handled the economic crisis, now has to reach out to the public and say, don't dispense with me, dispense with my services, now we seem to be out of the worst. He needs to make the argument to people that his skills are still needed now as the country tries to secure an economic recovery.
When we look ahead to the campaign itself, we mentioned the debates earlier, and we'll have a look in a while, Nick, at how the American debates have fashioned campaigns there. Do we expect these debates to have as big an impact on our campaign as they've had over there?
Well, in one respect, no, and in another, yes. No, because American debates have the impact they do, in part because the public often don't know the men who are running for president. Barack Obama came from nowhere because it's not a parliamentary system. People emerge as presidential hopefuls, and the debates are sometimes the first opportunity that many ordinary people have had to engage with them. Here we're familiar with our political leaders, less so of course of Nick Clegg, who gets this big electoral leg up by taking part in that particular process. But they may matter in a huge way for this reason. Peter Mandelson said something behind the scenes to Labour Party workers yesterday which had the ring of truth to it. He said the public are in two minds about this. On the one hand, they give some credit to the government for what it's done. On the other, they hunger for some sort of change. And the outcome of the election will depend, in many people's minds, on that balance. Do they think we can't risk what we've got by changing? Or do they say, for goodness sake, it's time we had a new lot in there? And as people battle with that in their own minds, in constituencies up and down the land, the debates may be one crucial way in which they come to that judgment.
People might be wondering today, Nick, we've seen Gordon Brown, we saw David Cameron earlier, we saw Nick Clegg earlier. What does the rest of the day hold for them? We know that Gordon Brown, after this, will probably go out campaigning, the other two as well. Any idea what's going to happen?
Yes, what we know is that they will indeed be wanting to show the sort of energy that they want to demonstrate during the campaign. They will want to demonstrate that they're getting out and meeting ordinary voters. We can't say precisely where Gordon Brown's going for security reasons, but we know he's heading to Kent. And he is likely to do the sort of campaigning that is designed to illustrate that he regards himself as the underdog, that it's not glossy and it's not expensive, that he will be popping into workplaces, he'll even be popping into people's homes, we're told, for a cup of tea, sitting on their sofa, not entirely unannounced, I assume you, but the sort of thing that's designed to get a different flavour. He hopes to portray David Cameron as the wealthy front runner for this particular contest. Mr Cameron is in the West Midlands later today, we're told, we're expecting some remarks made to a rally in the next half hour or so here in the capital. He again will be meeting voters, and Nick Clegg again is around the country speaking to voters as well. This is not just about pictures for national news looking energetic, it's not just about meeting voters, it is about touching down in as many of these places that will actually determine the election as possible to make a difference. Because the thing we too rarely remember in our business, in the national media, this isn't a national election, it's a series of local elections. People are voting for their own member of parliament, their own local representative. So being there, saying the Prime Minister, the leader of this or that party, being in your town, in your patch, does make a difference.
Nick, we'll talk a little more later on. Thank you very much. Nick Robinson there, and we'll wait then for the Prime Minister to come back to Downing Street and make that statement. In the meantime, let's join John again outside the Houses of Parliament.
Huw, thank you very much indeed. And I'm joined by a rather controversial figure around Westminster, Charlie Whelan, who is the political director of the Unite Union, but also used to be Gordon Brown's spokesman for many, many years. Charlie Whelan, good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us. So what role are you playing in this election campaign?
Well, I have an office down the road at the Unite headquarters, and we've been working very hard in the key seats, in the marginal seats that are going to be so crucial in this election, talking to tens of thousands of Unite members and trying to persuade them to vote Labour.
And this is the counterpoint to the Ashcroft operation, isn't it, if you like?
Well, not really, because Lord Ashcroft, as you know, doesn't pay tax in this country, gives millions of pounds to the Conservative Party.
He does, on his UK earnings, he does pay tax.
But he doesn't pay tax on any of his other earnings. He's given millions of pounds to the Conservative Party. Trade unions, of course, have a tiny proportion of their dues they give to the Labour Party and help to elect a Labour government.
So how much has Unite given the Labour Party over the past 5 years?
Oh, well, I don't know the exact figure, John, but I should think it would be about £10 million.
So you're not an insignificant... I just wanted to make the point.
No,
you're not an insignificant donor towards the Labour Party.
No, not at all. And we're proud of it. And it's all open and above board. And as you say, every single Unite member pays tax in this country.
Yes, and do you think that that's a good thing for Labour to be kind of advertising that link when we've just seen, you know, the strikes at British Airways and the disruption that's caused to people's holiday plans?
Well, I think what people are really concerned about in this election is the economy and whether or not they've got a job, and they'll be able to compare Gordon Brown, a man of substance who's leading us out of recession, to David Cameron, who is just all PR and has got no experience whatsoever. So that's what people are really interested in, John.
But equally, then look at what happened last week with that letter that was sent to the Daily Telegraph by all those captains of industry. They're not the sort of people who normally break cover.
No, but these people, of course, they don't want to
and
pay...
they were supporting the Conservative Party's policies on national insurance.
Of course, John, of course these people don't want to pay tax. And as you know, national insurance is a much fairer tax, because if you're poor, you pay much less. And if you're a pensioner, you don't pay it at all, as opposed to VAT, which the Tories like to raise, which is unfair on poor people and pensioners. And therefore, there is the contrast between a Labour government that hasn't raised VAT through its whole period in office, and a Tory government that always does raise VAT, and a fairer tax, which national insurance.
So you're saying, hang on, you're saying that the head of M&S, the head
no,
of
I didn't
Sainsbury's,
say that.
no,
I never said that. Don't put words into my mouth, John. I said that.
You said they're doing it because they don't like to pay tax.
Don't point at me,
no,
John.
that's what you said.
I said national insurance was a fairer tax, and VAT is a fairer tax for poor people. That's what I said. And VAT is a tax that hits poorer people harder. So I was saying, at this election, John, you're going to have a choice. You're going to have a choice between a Labour government with fair tax and a Tory government. You know, the Tories got proposals to cut tax for the top 3,000 people in this country. Is that fair, John?
The Tories have said that what they want, they've got no plans to increase VAT.
But they said that at every election.
But it's no different from what Alistair Darling has said.
When did Labour raise VAT in all the years they've been in office? They haven't raised VAT at all, John. It's the Tory party that always raised VAT.
Well,
every single... I mean, I'm old enough to remember.
Okay, if you want to trade election pledges, the Labour Party went into the election in 2005 pledging that they would not raise the top rate of tax. Today, April the 6th, the top rate of tax has gone up to 50%.
Well, I think that's very good. I'm glad you raised that, because there is a fair tax. We're raising the top rate of tax.
So then pledges don't count for anything.
For the very people at the top, as opposed to the Tories who want to cut tax for the top 3,000.
You've just changed the grounds of the argument.
Well, of course I'm changing the grounds of the argument. You've just made a point for me.
You.
It's fair tax against unfair tax, and people will have a choice in this election, John.
But there's a question of trust as well about politics, isn't there? And if you go into an election pledging that you're not going to raise the top rate of tax, and you do raise the top rate of tax, which is what this government has done, then that is, whether it's just or it's a fair tax or it's not a fair tax, leave that argument to one side. It's a broken promise.
No, I think what's really important is what you do in a recession. I mean, all sorts of things happen in terms of a government that you couldn't have counted for. And of course, this is what's happened. We've had a recession and we've had to raise money from tax. And of course, the way the Labour government has raised money from tax is through a much fairer way. So you might have to pay a little more now, John, because I'm sure you'll be on the top rate of tax. You might have to pay a little more, but people down the bottom won't.
Okay, Charlie Whelan, we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Well, let's have a look at the three latest opinion polls that have been released today. A YouGov poll for the Sun newspaper has the Conservatives on a 10-point lead. They're on 41% to 31%. The Liberal Democrats are on 18%. Now, a poll by opinion for the Daily Express also has the Tories on a 10-point lead. They've got 39%, Labour 29%, Liberal Democrats on 17%, while today's ICM poll in The Guardian shows a much smaller lead for the Conservatives. They're 4 points up, with 37% compared to 33% for Labour and 21% for the Liberal Democrats. Well, we can speak now to Simon Hoggart, sketch writer, political sketch writer for The Guardian, and to Andrew Hawkins from Comrades. Both of you, thank you very much indeed. Andrew, let me come to you first. What should we make of where the polls are at the moment?
I think the thing to do is not to look at any one individual poll, but to look at the monthly averages. And what that tells us is that until the end of January, the Conservatives had a double-digit lead. Since then, they've been in single figures, but over the last couple of weeks, that lead has been gradually creeping up. And the average at the moment is around about 7 or 8 percentage points. So it's on a knife edge. But I think when you take into account regional variations in voting behaviour and in the Conservatives' lead, in particular in places like London and the South East and some key parts of the Midlands, that actually they're not in a bad position at all.
And Simon Hoggart, I was talking a moment ago to Charlie Whelan about the sort of, the campaign for the marginals. Do you get big, vast differences between how marginal constituencies vote, or is it just the country as a whole?
No, the interesting thing is that recently we've seen that in spite of all Lord Ashcroft's millions being poured into marginal Labour seats, it hasn't done them very much good. The Tory lead is only very, very slightly higher in the marginals than it is in the rest of the country. What's going to be more important, I think, is an election like this, when clearly the electorate hasn't made up its mind in a way that in 1997, for example, it clearly had. There could be a tipping point, and it might be just one small factor, like, for example, 1970, Ted Heath, miners on strike. Suddenly an independent report came out saying the miners were underpaid, and you could see the support slipping away from Heath. Again, 74, that was 74. 1970, Harold Wilson looked as if he was cruising to victory, but then the balance of payments crisis came upon us, and that seemed to matter tremendously. We could have a situation, end of this month, outcomes of the National Statistics Office showing that, in fact, we're slipping back into recession, or that we've leapt clear. Those are going to be fantastically important figures when they come out.
Yes, Andrew, I'm sure you have all this polling history at your fingertips. Do polls change a huge amount during an election campaign, or is it kind of like the great adverts for, for soap powder, where what you're trying to do is you're spending millions on advertising, not because your sales are going to suddenly grow up massively, you're just trying to defend your market share?
Yeah, there's an old saying that you can't fatten a pig on market day, and the Conservatives have only got 4 weeks to pull themselves sufficiently clear of Labour, and history shows us that the polls do converge a little bit in the final weeks. I mean, they grow closer to each other, and they need to do that, because when you look back at the polls between now and the beginning of last month, the variance among online pollsters goes from 2% Conservative lead up to 13%, and for the more traditional telephone pollsters, it's half of that variation. So not only are the party leaders going to be pretty nervous come 7th of May, I think there'll be some pollsters who'll be pretty nervous as well, because 1 or 2 percentage points either way could have a colossal impact on the outcome, on the number of seats that the party gets.
And Simon, just on a kind of a factual point, and you were talking about 1974. Now then, when we got the hung parliament, the Liberal Party under Jeremy Thorpe, they only had 14 seats. The total number of seats held by other parties was maybe 40 or 50. Now it's something like 100 seats held by all other players, and therefore presumably that just statistically means there is a much greater chance that no one party gets an overall majority.
Well, quite, yes. Everybody says, the Liberals are down to 18 or 19%. The fact is that people don't vote Liberal Democrat where there's little chance of them winning. They do vote Liberal Democrat where, if the Liberal Democrats can persuade the voters that they have a really good chance of winning in that seat. So forget the Liberal Democrat figures. They might have even more seats now in a month's time than they do now. And that would put Clegg in a terrible position, because Liberal Democrats hate the Tories, but they certainly don't want to return to Gordon Brown and the events of the last 13 years. So you really will be in a pickle, I think, and may well have just to say, look, we'll take this vote-by-vote basis and wait till whoever comes out with most seats calls another election later in the year.
And Andrew, the other thing that we've been hearing about is the undecided voters. Are there unusually high numbers of undecided voters this time, or is this statistically roughly what we expect?
Well, it's undecideds and people who are not decided about whether they're going to vote at all. When you look at the corresponding figures before the 2005 election, which of course had the lowest turnout since second lowest turnout since the First World War, the proportion of people who said they were certain to vote before that election were quite a bit higher than the proportion who say they're certain to vote now. So I think it could play out either way. On the one hand, people's disdain for the whole political class could mean that people decide that they don't want anything to do with politicians and will stay at home. On the other hand, the fact that it's a very closely fought election could mean that people feel their vote's really going to count.
And just another point, Simon, I mean, I remember in the sort of 92 election, I think it was, when David Amess won Basildon, and you suddenly sense, well, this was going to be a very big Conservative, well, it was going to be a Conservative victory when people had been thinking before that, up until election night, that Neil Kinnock might win. Do you think there could be a similar moment, or are we going to see very differential swings, you know, where maybe Labour are piling up votes in Scotland but losing seats in the south, and, you know, and it'll just be a very odd picture?
It could be much more regional, yes, and that will depend on where the recession has hit most badly, most greatest difficulty. So, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's really going to be, it could be a tipping point election. Remember, very good example, 92, we thought that Neil Kinnock was probably going to win because the polls said so. Then there was a Sheffield rally, it looked vainglorious, stupid. You thought, do we want to trust our future to someone who behaves like a rock star when the lights are on him? Very, very damaging. Again, tipping point. It could well be one of those in which we see suddenly the polls all shooting in one direction quite late on in the campaign.
Yes, I saw you nodding there, Andrew.
I think for 92 is a very interesting example as well, because the assumption that Labour were going to win was predicated on an expected turnout that was lower than we saw on the day, and the fact that it was pretty close, the fact that we had that, you know, the Sheffield moment, actually brought people out during that final week that they decided, actually, I'm going to vote and this is the way I'm going to do it. Turnout then just shy, I think, of 78%, much, much higher than we've seen in the last two elections.
Yes, and I mean, an interesting stat there is that John Major's popular vote in that election was absolutely huge compared to, you know, Tony Blair in 2005, you know, which was much, much lower.
That's right, and the thing that we don't know at this stage is the impact of the expenses crisis. And it's interesting that a lot of the newspapers today in their coverage of the general election talk about the economy as the most important issue. In many respects it is, but I've just been taken aback at the scale of contempt that exists among voters for the entire political class. And the way that plays out, I think, will probably be principally to Labour's disadvantage, but all the main parties are going to be hit. And it presents a dilemma for Nick Clegg. Does he want to be seen as one of the big three, or does he want to distance himself from this evil group of people called politicians?
So, interestingly, so I'm sure you're not going to tell me who's going to win the election, who's going to lose the election, but would you make this prediction that turnout will be even lower?
Well, if it's seen as a very close contest, that could have the opposite effect. And the political parties have got these two challenges. The first is to persuade people to vote at all, and secondly, to persuade people that they're the right people to run the country. And in light of that, I'm nervous about turnout. I'm nervous that it could be lower than last time.
What's your feeling? I know you're not...
If Esther Ransom wins in Luton, we'll know there's been a political revolution in this country.
Do you think that we could see things like that? We could see some surprise results?
There's been some, yes. A lot of Labour candidates have been foisted on the local party, as happened in South Wales, as happened just now in Stoke-on-Trent. People like Dr. Taylor in Kidderminster, you know, he's won 3 elections now on the basis of keeping the local hospital open, even though it's closed. So what do you say?
OK, well, fascinating. Thank you both very much indeed for a quick guide of what the polls may have in store for us. Huw, back to you.
John, thanks very much. Well, if you're just joining us here on BBC One and on the BBC News channel, let me tell you what's going on. It is the day that Gordon Brown announces that he's calling an election for May the 6th. He's not made that announcement yet. He's at the moment meeting Her Majesty the Queen at Buckingham Palace. That audience, as we understand it, still taking place. We'll see the Prime Minister leaving when that's all over, and he'll make his way back here to Downing Street, where we expect him to emerge. We're not quite sure when, by the way, but it'll be within the next hour or so, to emerge with his cabinet colleagues and make the formal announcement. But the audience at Buckingham Palace still going on. The Prime Minister left Downing Street at 10 o'clock, pretty much precisely, and went over there just in a few minutes. So the audience started, we think, at around 10:10. And we'll be back with Nicholas Witchell in a second, who's at Buckingham Palace for us. But before that, let's just underline the fact that the campaigning has clearly already started. David Cameron will be speaking in a short while. Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, has already been making 2 statements today. This is the second of them.
I think this is a huge, huge election. I mean, it's certainly the beginning of the end for Brown. that's for sure. But I think he is directly and personally responsible for so many of the things that have gone wrong in the last 13 years. The illegal invasion of Iraq that only we stood up against. The unfairness and inequality in Britain that we've been campaigning against through our policies of a fair tax switch in Britain. The rottenness and corruption in Parliament that we've been speaking about long before the other parties ever realised there was a problem. And also the unfairness in Britain in so many other ways. The fact that children don't have a chance to get ahead. That's why our policy of smaller class sizes, more one-to-one tuition. The banks. Brown's utter failure to stop the greed in the banks, which have now created this recession, which have hit so many people so hard. Remember, Vince Cable standing alone in the House of Commons saying this can't go on, and neither the Conservatives.
That was Nick Clegg. Let's go straight to Buckingham Palace, where the Prime Minister's leaving. Nick Witchell is there.
There is the Prime Minister, looking content and happy, smile on his face, coming out. We make it 23 minutes after he went in to what we thought was going to be a short audience. Well, time for 2 cups of coffee, perhaps. But there the Prime Minister, having sought and obtained the dissolution of Parliament, now leaving Buckingham Palace to make his way back to Downing Street, smiling in the back there with one of his private secretaries, making his way out past our little group in the corner here, through the archway into the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. Crowds there. It must be said that those crowds more probably here to watch the changing of the guard ceremony later than to see Gordon Brown at Buckingham Palace. But there, as the Prime Minister's vehicle goes through the outer gates of the palace, past the photographers, and on down the Mall, no doubt, to Downing Street. Gordon Brown, of course, now to face his first general election as Prime Minister, this general election of 2010. And as we see the Prime Minister's motorcade making its way down the Mall towards Downing Street, let's go back to Huw, who is in, of course, in Downing Street.
The Prime Minister on his way back to Downing Street, and I think he'll rejoin his cabinet colleagues inside number 10 for a few minutes, and then they'll prepare the statement that, well, that he's to make, really, but they'll be there to give their support as this election campaign gets underway. But the cavalcade now well on its way back along the Mall, and it really does just take a few minutes. And let's not forget, of course, that the traffic is, well, how can I put it, manipulated so that the Prime Minister can make a rapid and problem-free journey from the palace back to Downing Street itself. Cabinet meeting started this morning at 9:15 and lasted about 40 minutes. And we may get a little more about the nature of that meeting a little later on, but certainly they formally approved Labour's manifesto, and we'll get a taste of the headlines of that manifesto when Mr. Brown emerges. So the Prime Minister's car turning along Horse Guards Parade, I think, making its way past the Treasury, and yes, that's right, up along Horse Guards Avenue, and turning onto Horse Guards Parade itself. Just the driveway next to it, which is the rear entrance to Downing Street, so a different way back to the way there. Nick Robinson, our political editor, with me, and Nick, they've gone back the other way, but we expect them to emerge this way later on.
That's right. I think he's going in the back entrance of Downing Street. He will meet again with his cabinet, and then they will come out for the formal announcement here on the steps. It would look slightly curious if he came before the world's media and all the cameras said hi and went straight through the front door.
Certainly would, but I think the point earlier on was the departure earlier is a bit of the formality of the day, really. The formal departure to go and see the Queen, that's a natural thing to do here. But now we're preparing for the showpiece event.
That's right. He's going in to have a last opportunity to meet to the cabinet and prepare himself here, because he is, for the first time, going to emerge from those steps and say to the public, say to the electorate, pick me, back me. I want you to give me your support to stay on for an extraordinary thing, really. He would be asking for a historic fourth Labour term, he'd be asking for an extension of the 13 years Labour have been in office, and he would be asking for a confirmation of a quite amazing political comeback were it to happen. A man who's been deep down in the polls, who there have been active efforts to remove him, not once but several times, and he would be saying to the public, no, confirm me as your Prime Minister.
We look ahead to the campaign and the kind of energy levels needed by these leaders. And David Cameron, as we were saying, would be a very young Prime Minister if he made it to number 10. Nick Clegg, a young leader too. Gordon Brown's always been seen as, in recent years, as somebody who's been exhausted, someone who's been battling and someone who's been dogged. Will there be efforts during the campaign to make him look much more energetic?
Well, we saw this yesterday morning. We saw him jogging around the park. Now, I don't think that was done for the cameras. He has taken up jogging. There was a real effort after a period in which he looked haggard on screen. There was a real effort by his friends, by his wife to say, come on, you need breaks, you need energy, you need to look after your diet and your exercise.
Nick, I'm going to ask you to pause for a second because David Cameron's about to speak at a party event. Let's join that.
Hi there, hi, hello, hi, good to see you, very good to see you. Hi, how are you? Hi, good morning, good morning. Very good morning. Hi George, how are you? Good to see you. Our candidate in Camden. Hi, how are you? Not far from home. Hi Sean, how are you? Very good to see you. Right, now where's Helen? We've lost her. Helen, there we are. You have met Sarah. Thank you. Thank you for coming together today. Let me tell you what I think this election is all about. It's about the future of our economy. It's about the future of our society. It's about the future of our country. It's the most important general election for a generation. And it comes down to this. You don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown. There is today a modern Conservative alternative that has got the leadership, that's got the energy, that's got the values to get this country moving. And if you vote Conservative, you are voting for hope, you're voting for optimism, you're voting for change, you're voting for the fresh start this country, our country, so badly needs. And don't let anybody tell you that there is no real choice at this election. There is a real choice. It's not just 5 more years of Gordon Brown or real change with the Conservatives. When it comes to our economy, there is a real choice. There is the Labour way of more debt and more taxes and more waste, or there is the Conservative way of saying no. We've got to stop that waste, to stop Labour's job tax, which would wreck our recovery. And look what's happened in the last few weeks. Leaders of some of Britain's biggest and most successful businesses saying that when it comes to getting our recovery going, it is the Conservatives that got it right and it's Labour who've got it wrong. Think of what Labour are saying to people in this country. They're saying we want to go on wasting your money and then we're going to put up your taxes. We say no. Every family in our country has had to make savings. Every business in our country has had to make savings. Why should government be any different? And there is real choice when it comes to the future of our society. We've had 13 years of Labour's big government and it's making our social problems worse. After 13 years, inequality is worse. The poorest have got poorer. There are still too many failing schools. We say it's time for change, it's time for the big society that we offer. Let's say to those charities and social enterprises that have got great ideas to tackle poverty, go ahead and do it. Let's say to people who have a passion for education that you can start up that great school and give our children a better chance. Let's say to that young man on welfare, we will help you, we will give you training, but if you don't take the job on offer, you cannot go on with a life on benefits. And there's a big choice when it comes to the future of our public services. There is the Labour way. More bureaucracy, more paperwork, more processes, endless targets. or there's the modern conservative alternative. Saying to those teachers, those doctors, those nurses, you have a love of what you do, you have a vocation. We want to set you free to do the job you love and to serve the people you want to care for. There are real choices at this election. And don't let anybody tell you that real change cannot happen from this election. If we win this election, there will be real change. I want to tell you who I'm fighting this election for. It's the people I call the great ignored. They may be black or white, they may be rich or poor, they may live in the town or the country. They work hard, they set up businesses, they work in factories, they teach our children, they keep our streets safe, they obey the law, they pay the taxes, they do the right thing. They're the honest, hard-working people of our country, and they're desperate to know that in this great country we can still achieve great things. And let this campaign be about inspiring them again that real change can take place. Let's think of the mother who wants a good school for her child but the system won't provide it, and let's win it for her. Let's think of the business that's got a great idea but is held back by Labour's red tape and taxes. Let's think of the social enterprise that's got a great idea for tackling poverty but the system and the bureaucracy won't let it. Let's think of the pensioner who doesn't want handouts but who wants dignity and security in old age and wants to leave his home to his children and his grandchildren, not have to sell it to pay for his care. And let's win it for all of them. Let's think of the soldiers returning to our country who want to know not just that society cares about them, but their government will always look after them. And let's win it for all of them. I know there can be real change if we win this election, because our plans are going to be exciting, our plans are going to be radical. Not just a new set of policies, not just a new set of politicians, but a whole different way of doing things in our country. Because let's be frank about this. Look at our economy. We've had the biggest boom and bust for a generation, and we need a whole new economic model. Look at the problems in our society. We don't just need a lick of paint, we need a whole big change. Not just asking, what can government do for me, but what can we all do together to make our society stronger? And look at the mess of our political system. It's not just the shame and the mess and the shambles of expenses. It's the whole top-down, I know best, do as you're told, take what you're given and just put up with it system that has to change. We know that this should be about people power. We know that politicians should be accountable to people, answerable to people, and not the other way round. So if we get in, we're going to shake things up. We're going to cut the size of the House of Commons. We're going to get rid of the ID cards. We're going to get rid of the regional nonsense. We're going to cut ministers' pay and freeze it. We're going to cut the bureaucracy that's got so out of control and make people feel proud again about that building over there, thinking, yes, it is my parliament. It's my government. It answers for me and not the other way round. That's the change that we're going to bring. And don't let anyone say we just have to put up with what we've got. We know what Labour will say. Stick with the devil you know. Don't risk change. The other lot won't be any better. Frankly, we couldn't be any worse. But don't think like that. Where is it written that we have to put up with more debt, more taxes, and more waste? Where is it written that we can't deal with the problems of antisocial behaviour and crime and violence on our streets on a Friday and Saturday night? Where is it written that we can't have the best state schools in the whole world? We're one of the richest countries in the world, and we deserve better. We must be saying to people, don't just put up with what you've got. Don't just ask for better from your politicians. Demand that you get better. That is what we offer at this election. So as we go out on this campaign trail, I want everybody to say to the people of this country that there is a modern conservative alternative that's about voting for hope, voting for optimism, voting for change. This country deserves so much better than 5 more years of Gordon Brown, and that is what we must offer. So let's get out there and say, let us get off this road to ruin and instead get on the path to prosperity and progress. Let's fight for what we believe in. Let us take a case to the country, to the people of this country, about hope, optimism and change, and let's win this election for the good of the country that we love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Conservative leader David Cameron addressing supporters there just on the south bank of the River Thames. We can see the Houses of Parliament just opposite. They're standing in front of the old County Hall there. Now, Ben Brown, our correspondent, is there. And Ben, we may have to come straight back to Downing Street if the Prime Minister emerges, but just give us your impressions there.
Well, David Cameron there kicking off his campaign. It's a busy first day for him. He's starting here at County Hall, talking there to the party faithful, 200 or 300 of the Conservative Party activists who've been invited here for this launch. From here, he's going on to Birmingham and to Leeds, but really putting a lot of energy into this first day of his campaign. And his message there, really, that this is going to be the most important general election, he said, for a generation. His message, and this got a huge cheer from the activists behind me, you don't have to put up with another 5 years of Gordon Brown. He said the people should vote for hope, for optimism, vote for change and a fresh start. And really in an echo of John F. Kennedy, he said, don't ask what your government can do for you, what can we all do to make society stronger? That was David Cameron's message here this morning.
Ben will be back with you later on. Thank you very much, Ben Brown there, who's monitoring events at that David Cameron event, just, well, literally half a mile away across the River Thames. And Nick Robinson is with me here, our political editor. Nick, we're expecting the Prime Minister to emerge, really, with Cabinet colleagues any second, so we'll wait for that to happen. Just wondering what you made of the David Cameron speech.
Well, intriguing already how all the party leaders want to look like they're not part of the Westminster Village. So he chose a backdrop deliberately so he could point out there, didn't he? Point at the House of Commons as if he is with the people against the House of Commons. And I think when Gordon Brown gives his speech in this formal atmosphere, he will then dash off, we're told, into Kent, and we'll see him in workplaces, we'll see him in people's homes, designed to do exactly that, to say, I'm with you, not with them. Because part of what we know this election kicks off is a process where the public have to kind of filter their anger with politicians as a whole, with Parliament as a whole, about the expenses scandal, lobbying and all the rest. Big decision for many people. Do they vote? Do they vote as they always have? Do they punish individual MPs? What do they do to reflect the frustration they felt about the way politicians have behaved?
Did the David Cameron words there tell us something new about the kind of campaign he's going to run?
Simply that he is not going to allow Gordon Brown to run as the underdog. The Tories can see this coming. They know that the Labour Party want to present the Prime Minister as being the underdog, as fighting against the rich guy, not just personally, but also the rich and successful party that has assumed that it's going to get office. David Cameron clearly, by that image, is not going to let him do that easily.
Now, when we get the Prime Minister emerging here, what should we be looking out for? What are the key things in the message that we'll be wanting to focus on?
The key thing we want to hear from him is how he frames the debate. Now, we've been given a little sense of that already. We've been told that he will say that after such hard work to get through the recession, that no one will likely throw that away when the country is now trying to fight for economic recovery. I think the economy will be a central message, but we've also been told that that will be one of several themes that he has. 3. Economic recovery, 1. Secondly is how to protect public services, he will argue, at the same time as cutting the budget deficit in half over 4 years. And 3rd, and probably newest of all, will be about political renewal. Exactly the message David Cameron was implying there when he talked about changing Parliament, where we will get more, not today I suspect, Huw, but we're going to hint today of the fact that he wants to run as a radical reformer, shaking up the nature of politics, the voting system, the House of Lords and so on, not just what politicians themselves do.
He'll be flanked today, if indeed those cabinet ministers come out with him, by some people who, privately at least, have expressed quite a few doubts about his leadership in the past few years. will there be any questions today about the concept of unity? Well, let's wait, Nick, because here they're emerging, led by some of the cabinet ministers, and let's wait for that announcement. Jack Straw, the Justice Minister, Tessa Jowell, and I can see Yvette Cooper, Baroness Royal, the Leader of the Lords. So the entire cabinet lining the pavement outside number 10 Downing Street and waiting for the Prime Minister himself to emerge, the Miliband brothers, and Lord Mandelson there, waiting for the announcement to be made. Alan Johnson, the Home Secretary, just the nearest minister to the policeman there, and on the other side we can see the door opening and the Prime Minister emerging.
It will come as no surprise to all of you, and it's probably the least well-kept secret of recent years, that the Queen has kindly agreed to the dissolution of Parliament, and a general election will take place on May the 6th. I come from an ordinary middle-class family in an ordinary town, and I know where I come from, and I will never forget the values: doing the right thing, doing your duty, taking responsibility, telling the truth, working hard, that my parents instilled in me. And over these last few months, this government at every time has fought hard, facing the biggest world recession, to fight on behalf of hard-working families on middle and modest incomes. And over the next few weeks, I will go around the country, the length and breadth of our land, and I will take to people a very straightforward and clear message. Britain is on the road to recovery, and nothing we do should put that recovery at risk. There will be many big challenges and many big decisions to make over the next few months, upon which our future success depends. Get the big decisions right, as we did in the last 18 months facing world recession, and jobs, prosperity, and better standards of living will result. Get the big decisions wrong, and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people are diminished as a result. Our economy is now moving forward, but to withdraw billions of pounds from the economy will put recovery at risk. Unemployment has now been falling, but a government that doesn't care to implement our plans to help the unemployed will see unemployment rise faster again. Small businesses are starting to grow, but a double-dip recession would hit thousands of them. That is why I'm asking the British people, I'm asking you, the British people, for a clear and straightforward mandate to continue the urgent and hard work of securing the recovery, building our industries for the future, and creating 1 million skilled jobs over the next 5 years. And I'm asking the British people also for a mandate that as we cut the deficit by half over 4 years through fair taxes and reductions in public expenditure, that we will maintain and improve our frontline public services, our police, our schools, and our hospitals. And I want to give a direct guarantee to every single citizen of Britain that when you need the police, when you need help with cancer care, when you need your GP at the evenings or at weekends, when you need as a child to have personal tuition in your school, then these public services will be there directly guaranteed to you as an individual citizen when you need them and accountable to you and your family. And we will not allow 13 years of investment and reform in our public services to build up the future of these great services to be put at risk. During these next few weeks, we will keep in our minds and hearts the work of courage that is being done by our soldiers and our armed forces in Afghanistan. And we will support them in every way in the fight that they are taking to terrorism that is still a threat to our land. But I have one final mandate to ask of the British people as well. It is a mandate to improve public trust in our democracy and in our public life. Politics has been scarred by recent events. In the next few days, I will put forward a comprehensive plan so that the people of this country can be sure that there is transparent, accountable, open and democratic politics being pursued in our country at every stage, accountable to them in the future. And I want us to renew the contract between the people and those who they are sworn to serve. I am not a team of one. As everybody can see, I'm one of a team with energy, with substance, and with ideas to lead this amazing country in a second decade of a still new century. We will fight for fairness at all times. We will say to the British people, our cause is your cause. The future is within our grasp. It is a future fair for all. Now, all of us, let's go to it. Thank you very much.
Let's go to it as they all bellow questions.
Prime Minister
I'm not going to answer any of those at all.
issues this challenge, really, to go to it and to start the work of campaigning. And really appealed to the voters of Britain, 45 million of them, for a mandate in several forms. A mandate not just to clean up politics, but a mandate to carry on with the work that he is doing on the economy, though of course the other parties will dispute the value of some of that work. Our political editor Nick Robinson with me. We were just listening to every word of that, and what did we make of that, Nick?
Well, striking, though not surprising, that at the heart of that plea for a mandate was the appeal to keep the economy recovering and not, as he would argue, to put it at threat. But also, as I was saying just before he came out, a hint, a promise of a comprehensive package of what he calls political renewal. I think we're talking about changes to the voting system, we're talking about the reform of the House of Lords, long talked of, way more than 100 years, that he is now promising. And also striking who he chose to come out with. I remember standing on this street not very long ago, being told by a very senior figure indeed, forgive me, I'm not going to tell you who it was, saying Alistair Darling's gone. He will not be Chancellor. But who emerged from that door? At his side, Alistair Darling and his deputy, Harriet Harman, because what he wants to say to the British public is, when it comes to the economy, we, he is saying now, got the big decisions right. They, he's implying, David Cameron and George Osborne did not.
I think we should just underline, I mean, certainly for the viewers and for everyone else, Nick, that we do have the date now. It's formally confirmed. We were talking about it in very certain terms before, but it will now be on May the 6th, and it lines the country up for a month's campaign.
That's right, and it means we get underway. Things are different. Yes, of course, we've had news conferences and poster launches, but we are about to see a change. Many staff will leave this building now. People who work for the Labour Party lose their passes, lose their phones. They have to now go to Labour HQ. Ministers will leave their offices, go to their constituencies to campaign. There'll be 1 or 2 days left in the House of Commons to get the last bit of business done. Then that will effectively close down, and the action will move into the country. Because for Gordon Brown to stand on that step again as Prime Minister and secure it, he needs votes now. He knows he no longer can do it thanks to the support of his party or any deals internally. He now needs electoral support. Democracy has got underway again.
Just one little question, because someone on the website was asking this, Nick. Someone asking, does government shut down entirely for the next month? It kind of carries on in a skeleton function, does it?
That's exactly right. The Prime Minister stays the Prime Minister. The ministers stay ministers. So were there, God help us, a national crisis, terrorism? Was there an economic crisis? They would still turn to Gordon Brown or Alistair Darling and the relevant ministers. They would still have power. The difference, though, is day-to-day decisions they're not expected to take. And actually, some of those people in the House of Lords, Peter Mandelson, Lord Adonis, they are not now seeking election themselves. They would have more time. And the civil service are now able to say to the politicians, we'll only put in front of you decisions that have to be taken for the good of the country. And if you come to us with anything that we think is designed to make a partisan or a political party point, then I'm afraid, Minister, we're going to say no, Minister.
Nick, we'll talk a little more later on about the the kind of campaign we can expect. But for now, thank you very much. And if you've just joined us here on BBC News and BBC One on the news channel, let me just confirm, therefore, that the Prime Minister has emerged from number 10 Downing Street. Gordon Brown has announced the date of the election. It is May the 6th, and the Queen has already agreed to the dissolution of Parliament. That's the